Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Ask Shane Anything, the show where I connect with our patrons at SIFTD.net. Hope you guys are having a good week. Hope you have an awesome weekend of games planned. Obviously, the new Zelda is coming here in just a few days. I'm sure that's got you guys excited, but there's also ample things to play this weekend to warm up. This show is a reward for those of you who are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. Everybody gets to ask questions. Everyone gets to watch the archive, even our crew on YouTube, albeit at a significant delay. But if you don't like the delay, or you don't like ads or anything else involved with YouTube, head to patreon.com/sifted. For just $4 a month, you get this show, you get Game Phase, you get Pactor Factor, and all our other content way earlier than most gaming Patreons. It feels like a lot of them at this point are giving their patrons like a day of exclusivity, and then they're giving it away for free. We do not do that. We set you guys up with at least 4 days for Game Face, a week for Pactor Factor, and this show now is around a week as well. So you get a lot of value from our Patreon, and we'd really appreciate it if you guys could pop over there and give us some support. We have another awesome round of questions for this week, and we don't have a lot of time, so let's get right to them. First up, we have a question from Suicide King, who actually is the main man behind DeShazer Ryan Realty, one of our big sponsors. So Suicide King is awesome, and I will answer any question that he ever sends us. Let's get to it. Did you see after the announcement of the PS5 Pro, Geoff Keighley drew some criticism on Twitter for a lot of his tweets promoting Sony's new console? Hard Drive Magazine and him had a back and forth. They were insinuating that he was paid for his impressions and promotions. Do you think this is the case, or is it just that Sony is the market leader and Geoff is propping them up? Do you see an issue with this either way? Thanks, Shane. No, thank you, Suicide King, for everything that you've done for us. You've been an amazing partner to Sifted, and I have no problem answering this really good question. Obviously, I knew. It really sucks that I say knew, like past tense with Geoff, because we were really good friends, and we don't really talk anymore. But anyway, I knew Geoff for a really long time, and I watched him go through all the different periods of his career. To start off with, he was a journalist. He would write stuff about games. He did that series for a long time called, I think, The Final Hours, where we'd go behind the scenes as like a big AAA game was being finished, and he'd write like a big feature article about them wrapping up the game. That's where he started. Then he became a host at G4, where I worked with him for years and years. He was working on basically a call-in show on G4 for years. And then, obviously, he went over to Spike and started doing a show there. And then I went over there and was working at MTV, and I worked with Geoff at MTV for like 7 years. So I have a pretty good understanding of Geoff the person, at least who he used to be. I don't know him very well now. So I have a good understanding of who he used to be, but I have a really good understanding of his career and kind of how it's evolved. So the first thing I would say is that he used to be a journalist, but he's not anymore. He is not a journalist. And I can understand why there's confusion, because once upon a time he was, but I feel like probably only people like you and I will remember the days when he was a journalist. I think most of the people who watch the Game Awards or any of his other stuff that he does today, I think they just know him as like a presenter and the guy who hooks up all these awesome shows that have a bunch of games in them that people want to see. Now he's a marketer. He's not a journalist. So all the principles that go along with journalism as far as being even-handed and not showing favoritism, I mean, that stuff's pretty much out the window for him at this point. Like, I don't hold him to that anymore because that's not his job. He doesn't review games. He's not passing evaluations on games. He's not helping decide whether you buy a game or not, other than just showing it to you and saying, hey, here it is, make up your own mind about it. So there's really nothing wrong. If Geoff were to promote the PS5 Pro and PlayStation paid him money to do that, now he should disclose that. He should have something in the tweet saying this is a promoted tweet or whatever, but he should be allowed to do it. And it shouldn't negatively impact your impressions of the other stuff that he does, because those are marketing events that he does. The Game Awards, the stuff at Gamescom, all of it. Summer Games Fest, all that stuff is marketing. And that's honestly always been the difference between Geoff and like somebody like me. Even back in the days at Viacom and MTV, where he was working on his show on Spike TV, and I was running game trailers, and we were working together to lock down exclusives and stuff like that, he had already turned into a marketer, because he and I would talk about exclusives that I would try to lock down for the site, and he was trying to lock down for the TV show on Spike, and he was talking to entirely different people, even back then. He was talking to the marketing people, I was talking to the PR people, and The marketing people generally were more forthcoming than the PR people. So he would have a roadmap of what was coming a little bit earlier than I did. So a lot of times he'd be like, hey, obviously you can't share this with anyone, but game X, Y, and Z are going to be announced over the next 3 or 4 months. You might want to start thinking about what you want to do around them because I'm going to try to lock down something for the show. That kind of stuff happened. But he has swam in those different circles for like almost 20 years now. So trying to hold him to the same account as a journalist, I don't think is fair. Now, back to this specific instance here. I went back and looked, and I honestly don't see anything wrong with what he did. He literally just posted the news. He didn't say whether it was awesome or whether you should buy it or not, or you'd be an idiot to not buy it. He literally just said, hey, they announced this new PS5 Pro. Here's the price, blah, blah, blah. He did the same thing with 30th anniversary stuff. He never really interjects his opinion into it. So I'm not surprised that a bunch of fanboys jumped in and were like, oh, you're promoting Sony. But if you scroll up and you look at the day when Microsoft announced those 3 new consoles that it's launching before the end of the year, he did the same thing. He published the trailer for the hardware, said, hey, here's Xbox's new consoles. They're coming before the end of the year. And he let the people in his feed decide whether they wanted it or not. So I'm really struggling to see where the problem here is. I wasn't surprised by anything. When I started investigating this, Geoff posted the facts. A bunch of Xbox fans got salty and were like, hey, you don't do this for Xbox, when he actually does. The truth of the matter is that just Xbox hasn't had a big announcement for a while. So I feel like Geoff a lot of times gets unfairly judged. And at the same time, some of it is warranted. Obviously, I remember the whole Dorito Pope era. I was working with him when that happened. And it was a little bit of a minor earthquake at Viacom, honestly. Like, people were talking about it around the company and were a little uneasy about it. But that was so long ago. And to be honest with you, that's when everybody else realized that he had transitioned to a marketing role after people who were working with him had realized it a long time ago. So when people were like, oh, the Dorito Pope, and he's bought off by Doritos and Mountain Dew, we're just like, no. First of all, Doritos and Mountain Dew aren't video games. It's not a conflict of interest. And second of all, he's trying to make sure the stuff that he's doing sticks around and keeps happening. He's trying to get sponsors and marketers to get involved with the stuff that he's doing. So this is a big ado about nothing, honestly. I don't think Geoff did anything wrong. I think what you're seeing is just a lot of angry fanboys going after him for nothing, and I think he's very much used to that. And I would also say, too, that, like, there wasn't that much of a back and forth. Like, I didn't see Geoff getting really defensive and trying to defend himself or anything like that, because if you really look at it, it's kind of ridiculous. And I've kind of got to the point in my life where, like, if things are ridiculous, I just don't even address them anymore. It's not worth it. It's not worth the time addressing idiots. And I'm sure Geoff has got to that point in his career as well. He's just like, what's the point in engaging with these people who are completely irrational? So there's not some secret plot for Geoff to root for PlayStation. I'm sure if you went back and looked in his feed from a couple months ago, there's probably PlayStation fans there calling him a fanboy. I've been called a fanboy of everything at this point. I was a Nintendo fanboy, then I was an Xbox fanboy, then I was a PlayStation fanboy, then I came back around to a Nintendo. Basically, you're called these things when someone just doesn't agree with your opinion. So I don't think Geoff did anything wrong. I think everyone needs to accept that he's not a journalist anymore, and he hasn't been a journalist for a really long time, and he shouldn't be held to those standards. Okay, next up we have a question from Gregor G. Why do you think Ubisoft chose to make a stealth game out of the Star Wars license? Is that really a good strategy to sell as many games as possible? What other genre do you think it could have chosen to appeal to more players? Well, here's the thing, Gregor, and I don't think you're alone in this one. I think a lot of people are thinking this or feeling this way. I don't think it was Ubisoft's decision to make it a stealth game. I really don't. I don't think people realize just how heavy-handed Lucas is when it's dealing with stuff like this, like things outside of movies and TV. It's very difficult to work with. And to be honest, I mean, it's worked. So it's hard to argue with the results of what Lucas has been doing, but it does really stick its fingers in the pie. You're never going to run into somebody that said working with Lucas was easy. And I really believe that the stealth thing came direct from Lucas. I do not know this for sure. I don't have an inside contact at Ubisoft that has told me this. I just think it's kind of obvious because, to your point, Ubisoft knows that stealth isn't a big thing anymore. If it thought stealth was a big thing, we wouldn't be sitting here waiting for another Splinter Cell game. How long has it been now? Like a decade? If Ubisoft was all over stealth and thought stealth was a big selling genre in 2024, there would be a Splinter Cell game every 2 or 3 years. Instead, there's not, because people don't like stealth anymore. I think it's okay if you sprinkle it in here and there, but to make it the crux of a game in 2024 is, in my opinion, idiotic. So I do not think that that was Ubisoft's call. I think it was Lucas's call. And then the question becomes, should Ubisoft have pushed back hard enough so that Lucas saw the light and said, you know what, we're going to let you handle the video game part because that's what you guys do. And can you fault Ubisoft for not being heavy-handed with Lucas? Not really. I mean, so many of these publishers have waited so long to make Star Wars games. We have waited so long to play those Star Wars games that we dreamed we'd never see, and now they're kind of starting to show up, kinda. It's hard to blame Ubisoft for what happened with Star Wars Outlaws, but then you look at Lucas's perspective, and you're like, okay, this is a game about scoundrels, about the criminals in the Star Wars universe, and what are they going to do? They're not going to be overt, they're going to be covert. They're going to try to sneak around and do things because what they're doing is illegal, and they could get in trouble. So I kind of understand it. I think maybe the root of the problem is the setting. Why was that game based on scoundrels and criminals in the Star Wars universe instead of like the Jedi? I mean, that's really the root of all the problems. And again, we may never learn whether that was a concept that Ubisoft pitched to Lucas or whether Lucas went to Ubisoft and was like, okay, we'll let you make a Star Wars game, but this is the way it's going to be. It's going to be a stealth game. You're going to play as the scoundrels. You're going to play as the dark elements of the Star Wars universe. And I think most publishers, just like Ubisoft, were like, okay, like, whatever you say, we can make a Star Wars game. Yay! And I think now that the rubber is hitting the road with the game and people are playing it, and they're like, this isn't what I expected or what I really wanted. I think now we're like, oh, well, they made some bad decisions. I don't think anybody back then was like, oh, this is a terrible idea. I think at Ubisoft or a lot of other publishers, you're just happy that you're allowed to make a big budget Star Wars game with Lucas riding shotgun. So I really think the problems with this game and ultimately the reason why some people don't like it goes back to the root concept. I don't know why Lucas would push for this. It hasn't been successful with it either. Its worst performing film was a film very much like this game. So Lucas should have known better than anyone that this concept isn't all that popular with Star Wars fans. So I don't know who pushed the concept. I don't know if Ubisoft pitched it to Lucas or it was vice versa. Either way, whoever pitched it made a huge, huge mistake. And unfortunately with a game like this, there's no way to fix it. You can't just remove all the stealth. They're getting rid of some of the instant fail parts of the stealth mission, some of them. That's about the best thing that you can do. You can't completely ditch all the stealth missions and make it more of an action-oriented game. So I guess what I would say is I hope publishers and Lucas both learned that the Star Wars license isn't infallible. You have to create even Star Wars games that the fans want. You can't just force feed something onto fans and they're just going to lap it up. That just doesn't happen anymore. So I don't know who pitched the idea, but I think everybody learned that, like, if you're going to make a Star Wars game, you better make it about the Star Wars that everyone likes. Okay, next up we have more of a cultural question from Zet Saber. What activities do you see phasing out over the next few years? For example, in my area, laser tag was very popular in the 2000s, paintballing was popular in the 2010s. Now those types of businesses have died out. I feel going to the movie theaters is next, but is there anything you have observed recently? Maybe an alternate way of looking at it is, what do your nieces and nephews do with their friends? Okay, Zet Saber, the first thing I'm going to say is, a few months ago, I might have agreed with you about theaters. It really looked dire. It really looked like they were going out of business. But I'll just say this, the last part of the summer here, it feels like there's been a sea of change. It feels like people are starting to go back to the theaters. And not only that, like you say, what are my nieces and nephews doing? They're going to the movies, man. That's kind of where I'm getting this from. Like, a lot of my sisters and brothers are telling me all the time, oh, we're going to see this movie. Oh, we're going to see that movie. I feel like the younger audience kind of is what kept theaters going all this time. And I think they're also the ones kind of leading this resurgence of theaters. So I kind of agree with you. It did feel like it was all teetering on the brink there for a while. But I do feel like theaters are coming back, and I think they're going to continue to build momentum, and I think they're going to be okay. I don't know if the industry will ever go back to what it was before COVID, but I think they're going to survive, not necessarily thrive. So, first of all, I don't think theaters are going away, but other things, so laser tag and paintball, I think the problem with activities like that is that, like, once you do them once, you get it. And either you fall in love with it and you turn into somebody who goes back every week, or you don't do it again until another birthday party rolls around or some friend invites you to do it or whatever. I mean, I remember playing paintball. Like, after I played paintball, my thighs were so tired and weak, I could hardly walk to the car. And so paintball in particular, and laser tag does a little bit of that too. Like, you get so engaged with it, you don't realize how hard you're exercising until you walk out and you're like, man, I'm beat. So I think a lot of people try it and then they're like, wow, this is way more than I thought it was going to be. And so they don't do it anymore. So again, I think that's kind of why laser tag and paintball and stuff like that have gone away. Now, things that I think are going away. I don't know about going away, but I think we're seeing finally a softening of the music festival as far as people attending. Now, after COVID, pretty much every festival sold out because they weren't able to do them for a couple years. And there's a lot of pent-up demand to go out and see bands and things like that. And so for the year and a half after COVID, like, you could hardly get tickets to go see anything. And the tickets were outrageously priced because a lot of the concert promoters in places like Ticketmaster had not made money for like 2 years, and they were trying to make all their money back in like 2 years. And that really turned me off, honestly. Like, I went to a couple concerts and went and like realized how much I had paid and looked at the cost of t-shirts, and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to shows for a while because I just felt like I needed to take a stand against it. So now you fast forward another year and a half and festivals and concerts are not doing well at all. I have a lot of friends, I've mentioned it many times, who are DJs or who are agents for some of the biggest EDM DJs in the world, not kidding here, and they're feeling the pinch. They're hurting. And my one friend, and I'm not going to say his name, but he literally books like the 3 or 4 biggest EDM DJs in the world. Again, not going to name him because you'd be able to figure out who he is from that. And he has started doing things like booking his artists at like games, like baseball games, football games, hockey games, where they perform at halftime or they perform during a break or whatever, and they get paid buku bucks. And it's been a way for them to augment the lost revenue from all these festivals not doing as well as they used to. For example, like Coachella this year, you could walk up to Coachella and get in. That I can't remember if that has ever happened. Maybe when it first launched, but since I've lived in California for 25 years, I've never heard that happen, where Coachella was not sold out. Like, you could literally walk up to the gate and go into Coachella. Now, finding a hotel room may have been a little more difficult, but still, I've never seen that happen before. So to me, I don't know if they're going away, but one thing that I feel like has been really big over the last decade that is starting to soften and lose some of its market share and some of its cachet with people, it's festivals and concerts. And I think only the bands and the promoters and the ticket places are to blame because they just skyrocketed their prices for everything after COVID. So there's one thing it feels like, I wouldn't say is going away, but a big pop culture thing that people are starting to lose interest in. I do think it's concerts and festivals. Okay, our last question for this week's episode is another PlayStation hardware question from Justin. So, with the PS5 Pro finally being officially revealed, do you think Xbox holds to its stance of not having a mid-cycle hardware upgrade? If it does continue on with just the Xbox Series X, do you think this means it will release its next generation console well before PlayStation? Well, Justin, as I mentioned in the prior question about PlayStation hardware, Microsoft does have new mid-cycle hardware coming, but it doesn't bump it up in performance like the PS5 Pro does. It's basically the same hardware in new form factors with bigger hard drives and stuff like that. And I will say, I feel like that's a huge mistake. I'm not sure why Microsoft feels like it needs to do this. Anyway, that's not what you're asking. You're asking if Microsoft, since it seems to be ignoring the mid-cycle refresh, if its next fully powered machine, whatever the sequel to Series X will be, will come before PlayStation. It better. I mean, it better. Because it takes a lot of R&D and a lot of manufacturing and just overall a lot of commitment for PlayStation to put out this mid-cycle PS5 Pro. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of R&D and work that is involved in redesigning an existing console as well. So I'm not saying Microsoft didn't do anything for these 3 new consoles that are coming out, but it is significantly much less. Now, Do I think there will be a mid-cycle refresh? Will Microsoft change its mind? I don't think so. I think it's too late for that. I think it had the opportunity to do it with these 3 consoles that it's putting out here in like a month or two, and it decided not to. So that was a conscious decision. Here's the other thing. It knew PlayStation 5 Pro was coming. The announcement of the PS5 Pro was not a surprise. You can look on SIFTD. We had dozens of stories about the PS5 Pro at SIFTD.net before it was ever announced. Everybody knew it was coming. Everything about it had already leaked, including its form factor, before it was ever announced. Microsoft saw all that stuff. It knew it was coming. It made a decision to not compete with the PlayStation 5 Pro. And now that we're seeing the price of the PlayStation 5 Pro, maybe it made the right decision. Because a lot of people are pretty angry about how expensive the PS5 Pro is. So maybe Microsoft ultimately read the market right and was like, you know what? Particularly Microsoft, putting out a $700 console when it can't sell its $500 console, that would be asinine. So I think Microsoft made the right choice. I do not think it's going to do a mid-cycle refresh. And what I think Microsoft is counting on instead is releasing a console that is much more powerful than the PlayStation 5 Pro for around the same price as the PlayStation 5 Pro, like 2 years from now. And that maybe gives Microsoft a little bit of an advantage. And so yes, to answer your question, does it seem likely that Microsoft's next-gen console comes out before PlayStation 6? Yes, absolutely. And it feels like maybe in 2 years we get the next real Xbox. And my guess is we're probably going to be waiting another 2 years after that before we get the PlayStation 6. So it's a little risky to lose the whole discussion thing around hardware and let PlayStation have this spotlight. I mean, it is releasing new hardware, but people aren't excited about it. So it's a little risky to let PlayStation have this moment, but it already has the moment. It has all the moments. It is winning in a landslide against Xbox Series X. So I do feel there's a little bit of capitulation going on here where Microsoft is like, okay, we lost. And it has lost badly. So I feel like Microsoft is like, we've lost. How can we mitigate the rest of this generation as well as possible, releasing the same console with a bigger hard drive? That makes sense if you're a purveyor of Game Pass. And then it will give us the jump on the next generation of hardware. Now, extrapolate out from that, and you're like, okay, well, PlayStation 6 comes out 2 years after that. It's going to be a huge leap over whatever the next Xbox is, and we go on and on and on. The cat keeps chasing its tail. So, there's a lot to think about, but I do think Microsoft probably made the right decision overall, not releasing a mid-cycle refresh and trying to get the jump on PlayStation 6 with its next piece of hardware. And I do think it may be Xbox's last piece of hardware. Okay, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. Again, I just want to thank you guys for asking amazing questions. You guys really make me think about things in a different way. Even though I sit for 3 hours for Game Face, Matt does not bounce back stuff like this like you guys do. So it really opens my mind to thinking about the industry in different ways using the wealth of knowledge I've been lucky enough to accumulate across the almost 3 decades I've been covering the games industry at this point. So thank you guys very much. If you like this show, or you like any of our shows, you like Game Face, you like Pachter Factor, it would be really cool if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could go support us at patreon.com/SIFTD. Again, we show a huge preference to our patrons. You're not going to watch a show on our Patreon or at SIFTD.net and then watch people get it for free the next day. That's not how we roll. We give you guys a big gap so that patronage actually means something at our Patreon. And we just really appreciate it if you could help us out. Every dollar matters. So even if you just want to pledge $1 a month just to be like, hey, I just want to give you $1, that's cool. But again, if you pledge $7 or more per month, this show keeps happening. That is the Ask Shane tier. And I just want to thank everybody who does pledge at that tier for keeping this show going, because I really do enjoy doing it every single week. So as always, have yourself an awesome weekend full of awesome games. We'll see you for Game Face on Tuesday.